The first day at a new school is always daunting, and for Sarah, it felt like the weight of the world was on her shoulders. She had just moved to a small town with her mother, Emily, who had recently accepted a new job in a neighboring city. It was meant to be a fresh start, but Sarah couldn't help but feel like an outsider. Everything felt unfamiliar: the school, the classrooms, the faces of the students that turned to stare as she walked through the entrance. She clutched her backpack tightly, trying to suppress the knot that had formed in her stomach. Sarah had always been shy, and this new environment only heightened her anxiety. Her mother had encouraged her to be brave, to make friends, and to enjoy the adventure of a new place. But as Sarah entered the school gates, she couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong. The other students were already gathered in, groups, chatting and laughing as if they had known each other for years. She felt out of place, like she was stepping into a world where she was invisible. Her first class was English, and as she walked into the room, the whispers began. The students turned their heads, some with curiosity, others with judgment. She sat down at an empty desk, trying to blend in. But it wasn't long before she noticed a group of students near the front of the room, led by a boy who stood out from the rest. His name was Jason, and Sarah had heard rumors about him even before stepping foot into the school. Jason was the principal's son, and with that title came a certain level of privilege. He was known for his charm, his good looks, and his ability to get away with almost anything. But there was a darker side to him that Sarah was about to experience firsthand. As the teacher began the lesson, Jason's eyes locked onto Sarah. His gaze was filled with mockery, and Sarah could feel the weight of his attention. She tried to ignore him, focusing on the teacher's words. But Jason wasn't going to let her off that easily. "Hey, new girl," Jason called out, his voice loud enough for the entire class to hear. "Nice clothes. Did your mom pick that out for you?" The room fell silent, and Sarah's face turned bright red. She didn't know how to respond. She had never been one to stand up for herself, and Jason's comment hit her like a punch to the gut. His friends snickered, and Sarah felt her heart sink into her stomach. She could already feel the sting of being different in a place that was supposed to offer her a fresh start. "Bet you don't even know how to dress properly," Jason continued, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "What kind of school did you come from anyway? A farm?" Laughter erupted from the students around her. Sarah tried to hide her discomfort, but it was impossible. She had never experienced this kind of bullying before, and the fact that it was coming from the principal's son made it all the worse. It felt like she had no escape. The teacher glanced up, momentarily distracted by the noise, but she didn't intervene. Jason was the principal's son, after all. What would she do? Sarah looked down at her desk, pretending to concentrate on her notebook. She wanted to be anywhere but here. As the bell rang, signaling the end of the period, Sarah hurried out of the classroom. She tried to walk quickly, hoping that the other students wouldn't notice her, but Jason wasn't done with her yet. "Hey, don't think you're off the hook," he said, walking up beside her as she reached the door. "I'm just getting started." Sarah's heart raced as she tried to speed up her pace. She didn't know what to do. She had heard stories about bullies, but she never thought she would be the target. Jason's voice followed her as she walked down the hallway, mocking her with every step she took. By the time Sarah reached her next class, her confidence was shattered. The teasing had only just begun, and she didn't know how much more she could take. She felt isolated, like she had no one to turn to. She wasn't sure how to navigate this new school, but one thing was clear. If Jason was going to make her his target, she was in for a long and painful journey. The day dragged on, each class feeling more uncomfortable than the last. Jason's bullying didn't stop. He followed her through the hallways, making snide comments, calling her names, and embarrassing her in front of anyone who would listen. Sarah kept her head down, hoping the day would end quickly so she could go home and forget it all. But deep down, she knew this was just the beginning, and it hurt. It hurt to feel so invisible, to feel so alone in a place that was supposed to be a fresh start. When the final bell rang, Sarah rushed out of the school, eager to escape the torment. But she knew that the worst part wasn't over yet. She still had to face tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after that. Each day would feel like a battle, and she wasn't sure she was strong enough to fight it alone. The next few days at school were no easier for Sarah. Jason's bullying escalated quickly, each day bringing new forms of humiliation. What had started as teasing remarks and comments about her clothes and accent had now turned into outright cruelty. Sarah found herself dreading the school day more and more, the weight of Jason's taunts following her wherever she went. At lunch, she sat alone, picking at her food, trying to stay out of Jason's way. But it seemed as though he had made it his mission to make her life as uncomfortable as possible. It didn't matter that she was eating quietly or that she was trying her best to avoid any attention. Jason had a knack for making his presence felt, even when he wasn't close by. One day, as Sarah sat at the edge of the cafeteria, hoping to avoid the gaze of others, she felt a sharp jab to her back. She jumped, startled, and turned around to see Jason standing there with a smirk on his face. "Lost something?" he taunted, his voice dripping with mockery. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She had no idea what he was talking about, but she didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing her flustered. She turned back to her lunch, hoping he would go away. But that wasn't the end of it. Jason leaned closer, his breath hot on her neck. "Oh, wait, I know what you lost," he said, as though he were revealing a great secret. "It's your dignity. You really think you're better than any of us? You're just some country girl who doesn't belong here." The words hit her like a slap. Sarah's hands clenched around her tray, trying to steady herself. She had heard these kinds of insults before, but never in such a personal way. The whole cafeteria seemed to fall silent, waiting for her to react. Jason, sensing that he had the upper hand, leaned back with a smug expression. His friends laughed, watching the scene unfold. It felt like the world was closing in on Sarah. The laughter echoing in her ears, getting louder and louder. For the rest of the week, things only got worse. Jason's bullying became more physical. He would shove her in the hallways, making her stumble into lockers or the walls. He'd steal her books and toss them around, laughing as Sarah scrambled to gather them up. Each time, the laughter of the students around them made it impossible for her to escape the shame. It seemed as if no one was willing to stand up for her, and even if they had, Sarah wouldn't have known how to react. She felt small, invisible, and helpless. One afternoon, as she walked to her next class, she found herself alone in the hallway. Suddenly, Jason appeared in front of her, blocking her path. She tried to step around him, but he moved with her, keeping her trapped. "Where do you think you're going?" he sneered, his eyes gleaming with mischief. You think you can just walk around here like you're one of us? Well, guess what? You're not. You never will be. Before Sarah could respond, Jason grabbed her book bag and yanked it off her shoulders. He tossed it across the hallway, laughing as it hit the floor. The other students watched, but no one intervened. Sarah's face turned red with embarrassment and anger. She bent down to pick up her bag, trying to ignore the feeling of humiliation building inside her. Jason's voice echoed through the hall as he called after her. "You're nothing, just a joke to everyone here." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes, but she wiped them away quickly. She couldn't let him see her cry. She couldn't show weakness. But deep inside, she was breaking. She thought about going to a teacher or even the principal. But who would believe her? Jason was the principal's son, after all. He was untouchable. It felt like nothing would change, and no one would care enough to stop him. The bullying didn't end there. Jason had a way of making her feel as though she was being watched at all times. In the hallways, in the cafeteria, even in the classrooms. It was as if he was always lurking nearby, waiting for the next opportunity to strike. He would drop cruel comments when she tried to answer questions in class, or snicker behind her when she gave a presentation. It wasn't just the physical bullying that hurt. It was the constant psychological toll it took. Sarah began to doubt herself, to question her worth. She thought maybe she wasn't cut out for this school. Maybe she wasn't good enough to fit in. It felt like she was being crushed under the weight of Jason's words, his actions, and the silence of everyone around her. Every day felt like a battle, and Sarah wasn't sure how much longer she could fight. She tried to stay strong for her mother, for herself, but each day left her more exhausted than the last. She just wanted to survive. Her mother, Emily, noticed that Sarah's once vibrant spirit was dimming, but Sarah kept her pain hidden, unwilling to burden her mother with the truth. She didn't want Emily to worry, but deep down she knew that something had to change. The days grew longer, and Sarah's hope began to fade. But what she didn't know was that the worst was yet to come, and her mother was about to take action. Emily sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of coffee, but she barely noticed the heat. Her eyes were focused on Sarah, who sat across from her, absent-mindedly poking at her breakfast. It had been days since Sarah's demeanor had changed, and Emily could see the toll it was taking on her daughter. The light in Sarah's eyes had dimmed, and her once bubbly personality had grown quiet and reserved. The same girl who had been excited about this new chapter of her life now seemed like a shadow of herself. "Sarah," Emily finally spoke, her voice gentle but firm. "What's really going on? You've been so distant lately. I know something's bothering you." Sarah flinched slightly, but her mother's steady gaze didn't let her avoid the question. She had been trying to protect Emily from the harsh reality of what had been happening at school. She didn't want to worry her mom, especially since Emily had already sacrificed so much for this move. But Sarah knew she couldn't keep it in any longer. She exhaled deeply, her voice trembling as she began to explain. "Mom, there's a boy at school. Jason. He's the principal's son, and he's been bullying me since the first day. It started with small things, like making fun of my clothes and my accent, but it's getting worse. He pushes me around, steals my things, and makes me feel invisible. I just don't know how to handle it. Everyone else just laughs and no one does anything about it." Emily's heart sank as she listened. She had known that Sarah was struggling, but hearing the full extent of the bullying made her blood run cold. Emily had faced her own struggles in life, but the thought of someone hurting her daughter in such a way ignited something deep within her, a fierce protectiveness, a resolve to make things right. "Sarah," Emily said quietly, her voice filled with both concern and strength, "this isn't your fault. You don't deserve to be treated like that, and we're going to do something about it." The determination in her mother's voice made Sarah's eyes widen slightly. She had expected sympathy, maybe some comforting words, but she hadn't expected this level of resolve. Emily wasn't going to let this go. She wasn't the kind of person to sit back and allow her daughter to be mistreated. Emily's mind raced, thinking about what she could do. She knew confronting Jason directly would only escalate things and possibly make it worse for Sarah. But she also knew that simply waiting for the school to take action wasn't an option. The school had turned a blind eye so far, especially with Jason being the principal's son. Emily had to take matters into her own hands. That afternoon, Emily made up her mind. She was going to speak to the school, not just any teacher or administrator, but the principal himself. She was determined to make him understand the gravity of the situation. After all, Jason's behavior was not only disrupting Sarah's life, but it was also undermining the safety of the entire school. Emily wasn't going to let the principal's title shield him or his son from responsibility. It was time to take action. The next day, Emily walked into the school office with a purposeful stride. The receptionist greeted her, but Emily barely registered the pleasantries. Her eyes were fixed on the door to the principal's office. She had rehearsed what she was going to say, but as she stood there, she felt a wave of uncertainty wash over her. This wasn't just a conversation about school policies or rules. This was about protecting her daughter. Emily was shown into Mr. Thompson's office. The principal was sitting behind a large desk, his hands folded neatly in front of him. He looked up with a smile, but it faltered when he saw the serious expression on Emily's face. "Mrs. Davis, how can I help you today?" he asked politely. "I need to talk to you about your son," Emily replied, her voice steady but unwavering. "Jason has been bullying my daughter, Sarah, since she started here, and I'm not going to let it continue. You may be the principal, but I'm a mother, and I will not let my child be mistreated." The words were out before she even realized how they sounded. Emily had expected Mr. Thompson to dismiss her at first, but he didn't. His face softened, though there was a hint of defensiveness in his eyes. "I'm sure Jason didn't mean any harm. Boys can be a bit rough sometimes, but—" "No," Emily cut him off, her voice calm but firm. "This is not boys being rough. This is bullying, and it needs to stop. Jason's behavior has escalated from making fun of Sarah to physically pushing her around, stealing her things, and making her feel worthless. I'm here to make sure that this is dealt with and that it never happens again." Mr. Thompson seemed taken aback, his posture shifting slightly as he processed her words. He leaned back in his chair, the mask of authority momentarily slipping. "I'll take care of it," he said, his voice somewhat strained. "But I want you to understand that Jason is my son. I'll handle it discreetly. Please, give me some time to look into it." Emily wasn't about to back down, though. She stood her ground. "I understand that Jason is your son, but I am Sarah's mother. I don't care if he's the principal's son or not. Bullying is bullying. I expect immediate action. If it doesn't stop, I will take this to a higher level." The principal's expression shifted from surprise to seriousness. Emily's words had made it clear that she wasn't someone who could be easily dismissed. "I'll make sure it's addressed," he said, this time with more conviction. Emily nodded, her heart pounding, but a sense of relief also settled in. She had taken the first step. She had made it clear that she wasn't afraid to stand up for her daughter, and she wasn't going to let anyone, not even the principal, stop her. As she walked out of the office, Emily felt a surge of strength. She knew that her actions would send a message to both Sarah and the school. Bullying would not be tolerated, and she would be there every step of the way to make sure it didn't happen again. The tension at school had been building up for days, and Sarah could feel it in every hallway, every classroom, and every corner of the school. She was waiting for something to change, but nothing seemed to happen. Jason's bullying had not stopped, and the silence from the school only made things worse. Emily's words had given Sarah a little hope, but deep down, she wasn't sure if things would ever improve. That was until Emily decided it was time for a confrontation. It was a Thursday afternoon, just as Sarah was leaving her last class of the day, when she saw her mother standing near the front doors of the school. Emily wasn't known for being a regular visitor to the school, and Sarah's heart skipped a beat when she saw her. Something was different today. Her mother's expression was determined, a fierce resolve in her eyes that Sarah had never seen before. Sarah had barely taken a few steps toward her mother when Jason appeared in the hallway, as if on cue. He was flanked by his usual group of friends, his smile wide and confident. Sarah knew what was coming. She could feel the knot tightening in her stomach. Jason was notorious for his ability to intimidate anyone who came near him, and now he was looking right at her with a gleam in his eye. "Hey, new girl," Jason said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Did you get lost or something?" His friends chuckled in the background, sensing another opportunity to humiliate Sarah. But Emily didn't let the situation unfold without stepping in. With a steady, purposeful stride, she walked right up to Jason, standing tall and unflinching. Her voice when she spoke was calm but firm. "Jason," she said, her words cutting through the air like a knife. "I've had enough of your behavior. I know exactly what you've been doing to my daughter, and I won't tolerate it any longer." Jason, taken aback by her directness, raised an eyebrow and tried to hide his surprise. His friends paused, sensing that something was different about this encounter. They had all been used to seeing Jason as the untouchable king of the school, the one who could do whatever he wanted without facing any consequences. But Emily wasn't afraid. "What do you think you're going to do about it, lady?" Jason sneered, trying to regain control of the situation. "This is just how things are around here. Get over it." Emily didn't flinch. She stood her ground, her eyes locked on Jason's with a sense of unwavering confidence. "You think you can intimidate my daughter and get away with it because you're the principal's son? Well, let me tell you something, Jason. Bullying is bullying, and if you think you can continue to treat her like this, you're wrong. I will make sure everyone knows exactly what you're doing. I'll take this as high as I need to go." The air between them seemed to crackle with intensity. Jason's friends looked uneasy, glancing back and forth at each other. They had seen Jason lose his cool before, but there was something different in his eyes now. Emily wasn't backing down, and the realization hit him. She wasn't someone he could intimidate. She wasn't someone who would simply take his words and turn away. Jason's smile faltered slightly. He had always prided himself on being able to control every situation, to make others feel small and insignificant. But this time, it wasn't working. "What do you think you're going to do?" Jason repeated, trying to regain his bravado. But his voice lacked the force it had once carried. He could feel his power slipping, and he didn't know how to stop it. "I'm going to make sure you understand that there are consequences for your actions," Emily replied, her voice steady. "You can't keep getting away with this, and you won't. Not as long as I'm around." The hallway fell silent, all eyes on the showdown between Emily and Jason. The students who had once laughed at Sarah now stood frozen, unsure of how to react. For the first time, someone was challenging Jason, someone who wasn't afraid of him. It was a moment of reckoning for both him and the school. Jason glanced at his friends, hoping for support, but they, too, were silent. He wasn't used to this kind of confrontation. His friends had always been quick to laugh at his jokes, to join in on his cruel pranks, but now they were unsure. Sarah's mother had caught them off guard, and for the first time, they saw Jason not as a bully, but as someone who was being called out for his behavior. Jason's defiance slowly crumbled as he realized that Emily was serious. He didn't have the same control he once had. For a moment he seemed lost, unsure of how to respond. He had expected Sarah to cower in fear, to back down when he humiliated her. But her mother wasn't backing down, and neither was Sarah. Finally, Jason muttered something under his breath and turned to walk away, his pride wounded but not yet shattered. His friends followed suit, still unsure about what had just happened, but sensing that the power dynamic had shifted. As they walked off, Emily turned to Sarah, her eyes filled with determination. "Are you okay?" Emily asked gently, her hand resting on Sarah's shoulder. Sarah looked up at her mother, her heart swelling with gratitude. For the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of hope. Jason had backed down. The school had seen that her mother was willing to stand up for her. And maybe, just maybe, things were finally going to change. "Yeah," Sarah said quietly, a small but genuine smile forming on her face. "I think I'm going to be okay." Emily nodded, her protective instincts still alive and strong. "This is just the beginning. You don't have to face this alone, sweetheart. I'm with you every step of the way." And for Sarah, that was enough. The bully had been confronted, and her mother's unwavering support had made all the difference. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but Sarah finally believed that she could walk it with her head held high. The day after Emily confronted Jason in the hallway, Sarah woke up with a strange sense of relief. For the first time since the bullying had started, she didn't feel completely consumed by fear or anxiety. The weight on her shoulders, which had been growing heavier each day, seemed a little lighter. Her mother had done something no one else dared to do. She had taken a stand, not only for Sarah, but also for the principle of standing up against injustice. The message had been clear. Jason's bullying wasn't going to go unnoticed. At school the next day, the atmosphere felt different. Sarah walked through the hallways with a tentative sense of hope, wondering whether the confrontation between her mother and Jason had made any difference. Her thoughts were interrupted by whispers and glances from her classmates. For the first time, though, they weren't snickers directed at her. They were murmurs of curiosity, of speculation. The students seemed to be talking about what had happened the day before, and Sarah couldn't help but overhear a few conversations as she passed by. I heard Mrs. Davis really went off on Jason. She's not the kind of mom to mess with, huh? Yeah. Jason didn't look so tough after that. I think he finally met someone who isn't afraid of him. Sarah's heart raced. She had never been the subject of attention like this before, and while part of her felt uncomfortable with the spotlight, another part of her felt a strange sense of validation. Her mother had stood up for her in a way that made others take notice. Jason's power, his ability to humiliate her and get away with it, had been stripped away, if only for a moment. The very fact that Jason was no longer untouchable in her eyes made Sarah feel stronger. But as the day went on, she noticed something even more significant. Jason wasn't looking at her the same way anymore. He didn't make eye contact as she walked past him in the halls. His usual cocky demeanor was gone, replaced by a cold, guarded silence. He wasn't the same Jason who had once taunted her with such ease. When Sarah entered her first class, she could see that the shift was evident in the other students too. Jason's friends, who had always followed his lead, now seemed a little unsure. Some of them avoided eye contact with Sarah altogether, while others quickly turned away when they saw her walking toward them. They were still clinging to their loyalty to Jason, but they were beginning to question his behavior, if only for a moment. Sarah could tell that Jason's influence was starting to unravel. The day passed slowly, but Sarah couldn't shake the sense that things had already begun to change. By the time she got home, she had already heard some whispers in the hallways that Jason had been called into the principal's office that morning. She wasn't sure what had happened during that meeting, but she could sense that the power dynamic between Jason and the rest of the school had shifted. The principal had to address his son's actions, especially after Emily's confrontation. What had once been a private matter was now out in the open. That evening, Emily came into Sarah's room after dinner, a thoughtful expression on her face. She sat down next to Sarah on the bed and took a deep breath. I spoke with the principal today. I made sure that Jason's behavior was addressed. He's been given consequences, and I made it clear that this type of bullying is not acceptable in this school. I didn't want to go over his head, but I made sure that Jason understood the severity of the situation. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Her mother had followed through on her promise. Jason was facing the consequences of his actions. It wasn't just about Sarah anymore. It was about making sure Jason understood that bullying wasn't something that could be ignored, especially not when it involved the principal's son. Emily had shown that her words had weight and that no one was above the rules. Emily continued, "The principal seemed genuinely concerned. He didn't realize how bad things had gotten, but he assured me that this wouldn't happen again. Jason will be facing a suspension, and he'll have to apologize to you publicly in front of the class." Sarah's mouth went dry at the thought of an apology, but she couldn't deny the small flicker of satisfaction that rose within her. Jason was going to have to face the consequences of his behavior, and part of that meant acknowledging the hurt he had caused. It wasn't going to undo the damage, but it would be a step toward healing. The next day, when Sarah arrived at school, she could feel the difference. There was no taunting or snide remarks from Jason's friends. His usual entourage was quieter, more subdued. Jason himself kept his distance, his gaze averted when he saw Sarah in the hallway. It was clear that something had changed, and though Sarah couldn't quite believe it, she could feel the shift in the air. It was as if Jason's throne had been knocked from beneath him, and now he was struggling to regain his footing. During the school assembly that afternoon, the principal called Sarah to the front, alongside Jason, who stood beside him with his head down. The room fell silent as the principal spoke, acknowledging the bullying incident that had been brought to light and the measures taken to address it. When Jason apologized, his voice was low and hesitant, a far cry from the cocky, arrogant tone he used in the past. I want to apologize to Sarah," Jason said, his voice faltering as he spoke. "I've been a jerk, and I know that now. I'm sorry for what I did." The apology was not heartfelt, but it was something. For Sarah, it was more than she had expected. The fact that Jason had to publicly admit his wrongdoing in front of the entire school felt like a small victory, a validation of the courage her mother had shown. Though the apology was forced, it marked a turning point. Jason had faced consequences for his actions, and the school had taken a stand against bullying. It wasn't just about Sarah anymore. It was about creating an environment where cruelty and abuse would not be tolerated. And for Sarah, that was the most important lesson of all. It wasn't just about surviving school. It was about standing up for what was right, even when the odds were against you. As the days passed, Sarah found herself walking the halls a little taller. The weight of fear had lifted, replaced with a quiet strength. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but with her mother's support and the lessons learned from the confrontation, she felt ready to face whatever came next. The consequences of Jason's bullying had rippled through the school, and Sarah could finally breathe a little easier, knowing that the fight wasn't hers alone anymore. The weeks following the confrontation with Jason had been nothing short of transformative for Sarah. At first, she hadn't known what to expect after the apology or what effect it would have on her life. Would things go back to the way they were, or would she finally be able to escape the constant feeling of being an outsider? Now, as she walked through the school halls, she knew the answer. Something had shifted, not just for her, but for the entire school. Jason, though still maintaining his bravado in certain circles, was a shadow of the bully he once was. His once cocky demeanor had been replaced with a quieter, more cautious version of himself. The other students noticed it too. Where there was once laughter in the hallways at Sarah's expense, there was now a sense of respect. Jason's public apology had forced a reckoning, and his behavior no longer carried the weight it once did. Sarah could walk down the hall without the same feeling of dread gnawing at her stomach. Her confidence was slowly returning. In class, Jason no longer made snide remarks during group discussions, nor did he make fun of Sarah when she spoke. For the first time, it felt as though she was just another student in the class, not the target of cruel jokes. She could breathe again. But it wasn't just about what Jason had stopped doing. It was about what had changed within herself. Emily's decision to stand up for Sarah had taught her a valuable lesson. Standing up for yourself, no matter how difficult or intimidating, it seemed could make a real difference. The confidence that Sarah had once lacked began to take root, and she started to speak up in class more. She didn't shrink away from challenges. If anything, she embraced them. She even began to make friends, real friends who didn't judge her for being new or different. They saw her for who she was, and that meant the world to Sarah. One afternoon after school, Sarah found herself sitting in the library with a small group of classmates. They had become her circle of friends, and they were all genuinely kind. They spent their free time discussing their favorite books, sharing stories, and laughing together. It felt like the kind of friendship Sarah had only dreamed of when she first arrived at the school. As Sarah sat there, surrounded by people who accepted her, she realized something important. This was the first time in a long while that she felt like she belonged. It was more than just being part of a group. It was about being seen, being heard, and being respected for who she truly was. Sarah wasn't the shy, quiet new girl anymore. She was someone with a voice, with ideas, with worth. But it wasn't just the social changes that made her feel different. Sarah's mother, Emily, had also noticed the change. She saw the way Sarah carried herself with a quiet strength now, the way she stood taller, shoulders back. Emily had given Sarah the confidence to stand up for herself, to not let anyone walk over her. And though Jason's bullying had hurt, it had also revealed something deeper about Sarah: her resilience. One evening, Emily sat with Sarah at the kitchen table, the two of them sipping tea together. Emily looked at her daughter with pride in her eyes. "I see a difference in you, Sarah. You're not the same girl who walked through those school gates on the first day. You've grown." Sarah smiled, a soft blush rising to her cheeks. "I don't think I could have done it without you, Mom. You stood up for me when I couldn't. You showed me what it meant to fight back and to have a voice." Emily reached across the table and took Sarah's hand, squeezing it gently. "You always had that strength in you, sweetheart. Sometimes it just takes someone to show you that it's there." The conversation turned to other topics: plans for the weekend, Sarah's growing friendship with her classmates, and even a trip they were planning to take during the holidays. The worries that had once clouded Sarah's mind about school, about fitting in, about being bullied, seemed so distant now. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had brought them closer together as a mother and daughter, and it had forged a new path for Sarah. The change didn't stop with Sarah and her immediate surroundings. The ripple effect of the confrontation had spread throughout the school. Teachers began to take a more active role in addressing bullying and ensuring that no student felt alone or unheard. The principal, though initially reluctant to confront the reality of his son's behavior, had taken steps to enforce a zero-tolerance policy for bullying, making it clear to all students that the school would not tolerate mistreatment of others. Jason's fall from grace had been a difficult one, and he had struggled with it in the weeks following his suspension. His friends, once so loyal, had begun to drift away from him. They no longer looked up to him as the charismatic leader they once had. Some of them even started to apologize to Sarah, recognizing the harm they had allowed to happen under their watch. It wasn't an easy process, and it didn't make everything better overnight. But it marked the beginning of a shift in the culture of the school. Jason had been forced to confront the consequences of his actions, and in doing so, the whole school had been forced to confront its own passive acceptance of bullying. For Sarah, this new beginning was not just about surviving high school, but thriving in it. The lessons she had learned about self-worth, standing up for what was right, and finding strength in difficult circumstances, were lessons that would stay with her for the rest of her life. She had gone from being the quiet, timid new girl to someone who understood her own power and value. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was growing, learning, and becoming someone she could be proud of. And as Sarah walked through the school hallways now, she no longer felt invisible. She felt seen. She felt heard. And she knew in that moment that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she had the strength to face them. Emily had given her the courage to believe in herself, and with that belief came the freedom to embrace her future. It was a future that was no longer clouded by fear but illuminated by the possibility of who she could become.